Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Doctors of Running virtual roundtable, where we three doctors of physical therapy discuss the art and the science to the stuff that we put on our feet. But today is a very special day. We are really excited to be welcoming Sam Winebaum from RoadTrailRun with us here to the roundtable. We feel extremely honored that he's willing to join us. If you haven't checked out their stuff, which I'm sure you have, if you've been anywhere in the running world for any amount of time, they've been putting out reviews on all sorts of running gear, shoes, technology, and we are just so glad to have him here for his insight and wisdom. So thank you for joining us, Sam.
My pleasure, doctors.
Well, what we want to hear first, we kind of want to give you a chance to tell us the origin story of RoadTrailRun, how it started, and kind of what's the current vision and trajectory of what you guys are up to.
Sure. But first, something came to mind as you both are, all three of you are doctors of physical therapy. When I was at Dartmouth on the cross country team, they used to call me Dr. Grimm, but that's a whole other story. I've been running. I was trying to figure it out, but about 48 years. And I started in prep school because we had to do a sport, and I wasn't good at anything, but I did like to hike. And somehow I could put one foot in front of the other, but that was about it. So I started then, and sort of the origin why I'm still, after a career in startups and various businesses, I'm still into the game, if you will, still enjoying my running always, and into the shoes and the technology is way back in the 70s. When I was in high school, Nike came to my hometown of Exeter, New Hampshire, where they set up their first R&D and in the area, their first manufacturing. So as a high school runner, I had a wonderful coach, Ralph Lovshin, legendary coach. He coached 40 years. He could pull out notebooks, and for every cross-country workout going back 30 years, he said, Sam, you ran faster than so-and-so, and the following week he broke the record. But I also had, and he was very, very gentle, coached everything. He was more a pole vaulter, but he could coach everything. But at that time, Nike had their original R&D. Jeff Johnson was the original kind of sales guy, and he liked the area, and he figured out there was shoe manufacturing. And as they split up from Asics Tiger, he set up kind of the operation. So there were a lot of young runners. Many of them had been on the military team. We're all gathered in, if you will, and suggest, hey, you want to work in running, by sort of the mentor of all mentors, who was also on that team, Don Putnam. So I got to run with all kinds of neat runners, and even at the time pushed 100 miles a week before my senior year of high school cross country. I won 5 races in a row. Then my teammates kind of caught up, and we won all the championships. But I like to run long, and I continued that really through college. Of course, I was more a distance guy. Didn't have a lot of speed, but we went as a team to NCAA Division I in '78, and then continued after that through the mid '80s. Lived in Switzerland, did a lot of mountain running. There was a lot of trail and mountain running. I was an uphill guy. I think my finest performance was at Mount Washington in winning the junior title twice, and running 1:11, and finishing second in the juniors to Bob Hodge, kind of a legendary marathoner. But I worked in Switzerland. Then with family and work, I continued to run, didn't really enjoy it as much, got kind of heavy. I was working around the clock. And as I turned 50, so about 2007 or so, I started writing a blog, and I'd been involved in technology businesses, startups, and social media. Similar thing to Facebook, way before Facebook, in-store advertising, also in material science. But anyway, I started writing about technology and, of course, running, because I was still into the running shoes, fascinated, and I was running more. So that's kind of the origin, about 2007. And I did it on the side, something came along, I was just looking at Innovate, was one of the original shoes I wrote about. I was intrigued because it was really the first running shoe company that was created to make trail shoes, not recycled hiking boots or road shoes with a big outsole. So I ran a lot of Innovates, and that was one of the early things I wrote about, early GPS, so on and so forth. So, but over time, and mainly because I was consulting out here in Utah. I'm in Utah right now, but live in New Hampshire, in the area of electronic medical records and speech recognition. I didn't know anything about the science, any of this, but I'm a kind of forest for the trees guy, so they put me in charge of figuring out a web-based way to do an electronic medical record with speech recognition, command and control, whatever. I was out here a lot. And so I got to start, since I had a bit of a blog, I got a media pass to Outdoor Retailer, started building relationships with all the brands. At the time, they all came. Now, the more traditional running brands, your New Balance, never Nike, but New Balance, Saucony was always there. Of course, Solomon, but a lot of the brands were there. So I started building those relationships. And then over time, it became more of a, not full-time thing, but closer to full-time thing. I thought it would be important to have multiple perspectives, not just mine. Most of my wonderful tester reviewers kind of volunteered. They said, can I write for you? I said, well, show me what you can write. And they do a sample. And I said, that's cool. So we built the team. I think we're, last count, 22 of us, all
Amazing.
Around the world. We've recently started more, even though we've had reviewers like Derek Lee in Singapore for quite a while. I decided that, given I'd worked in Europe and I kind of understood how Europeans think and work and their work ethic, that I had volunteers from Germany. So we started German language coverage, and the guy's English is better than any of the rest of us. So Niles and Johannes, because they had, I forget which shoe it was, but it was one that we didn't have coverage in the US. We didn't have the shoe yet, and they did just a brilliant job in English. I mean, I was the German, I could Google Translate. But the concept really is to provide a wide perspective from a variety of runners of different paces, ages, skills, interests, from road to trail. We also cover, because I'm kind of a gadget geek, and I was the if you will, the senior editor for gadgets and fitness electronics for Competitor at the time. So I built those relationships with the various GPS companies, electronics companies. So we do cover that as well. So it's fun, because there are two things I need to focus on, which are make sure my testers get what they really want to run, but also what we really need to review, even if it isn't the flashiest. So there's a balance, and everybody tries to live along with that, because what's flashy and sexy isn't necessarily what millions are really looking for advice on. They're looking for the basic daily trainer, the 13th edition of the Ghost, the 14th edition of the Vomero, and what's changed or what hasn't changed. So that's also very, very important to provide that kind of coverage. Although, of course, this year, as you guys have done so brilliantly too, the fascination has been with all the super shoes, which, and I'm going to go off track here, but in all the years I've been running, 2017, when the Vaporfly came out, was the most significant shoe since probably the Asics Tiger Marathon and some of the first Nike Air shoes, which the Tailwind and the Air Mariah Racer, which I got my marathon PR in way back when. So this was a huge, huge seminal event, the Vaporfly. And what's come out since, you know, the race, the foams,
Yes.
and so it's very exciting, as you guys know. But anyway, so that's kind of a bit of an intro.
Yeah, this is great. I think
history.
Yeah, it's fun to hear the origin came out of your love for running. It was never, doesn't sound like it was this big, you know, calculated agenda. It was, this is what I love to do. I want to contribute to people thinking about this stuff, and it's grown into a team of people who can help people, you know, find the right thing for them by getting some more insight on what the shoe is like before they have to put down the dollars to do that. And to have that team is huge. We've talked about, that's one of the reasons we wanted to talk with you too. We just see so much value in all these different people who can review within teams and across teams, because everybody runs so differently. And to have insights from people who are different heights and weights and paces and style of running, strike patterns, etc., is just valuable to have that. So
one kind of thing that's kind of interesting is, you know, generally, I guess I'd put how shoes when a multi-test review come out in the end, when the crew says, okay, this is my score, this is my conclusion, they're either universally liked, almost universally panned, or there's a dissenter. Usually it's only 1 or 2 out of, say, 5. So a great shoe is a great shoe no matter what its purpose is. And usually it comes out. It really comes out. For example, the New Balance Fuel Cell TC, that's a shoe that struck a wonderful chord this year with a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a fun process to be looking at these things, and then interesting, especially I can imagine for you to see what are the differences between why people are liking this shoe and they're not, and that. But let's before we move on, is there anything else you want to share about RoadTrailRun? Also, I just have to give a shout out. There's one other thing.
Sure.
Your review of the Koros Pace 2, one of my friends bought it because I sent them. They're like, which watch should I get? And I was like, you should read this review that Sam wrote.
You know, I gotta say that one of the things about watches, you know, unless you take it off and you put one on, is how little you notice it, right? People can get all obsessed about the last heartbeat that's missing and this, that, and the other thing. But this watch, and I'm wearing it right now, after testing the Sunto 7 today on the hike, big improvements, is just very comfortable. And can I go off track just for a second? On watches? Sure. Okay.
Definitely.
The reason, and I'm going to take it up. Well, one thing, can you guys see? It's a little hard to see.
Yes.
One thing is you'll never lose it, okay? It has essentially a nylon strap with a super durable kind of Velcro attachment, right? See? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So given how lightweight it is, the lightest watch yet created, plus the strap, skinny guys and gals with the skinny wrists, right? It's going to stay on your wrist. You're going to get, I've gotten very solid heart rate readings from this. Now it's warm, it's summer, you know, it's a different matter when you get into winter, blood flow, blah, blah, blah. But its biggest advantage is lightweight and comfort, which is kind of cool. They've done a great job with it. But I love a lot of other watches too, you know. That's a really interesting field, but we could have a whole other thing about that.
Totally.
I think it'd be our 3rd episode.
Well, that's great. What we'll do now, we're going to transition into actually diving into some shoe topics. And before Matt's going to kind of take over leading the questions on this, but I think you know, as we think about this, what I was actually telling my wife this earlier. A lot of times there's sometimes a disconnect between the research that's being done and the questions that are being asked by the people wearing the shoes. And it takes somebody who has a ton of experience to sometimes start asking the right questions. And so that's why she asked, why are you excited for Sam to come on? And I was like, this is why, because he has the experience where he's asking the right questions. And so to hear what he has to say and ask, and the insight that he has, because there's always going to be gaps in the research, and questions can't be answered strictly by the randomized controlled trials that are out there. So to have insight and the right questions, I'm just excited. So Matt, you can take it away.
Go ahead, Matt.
So I want to echo that, since the focus is Sam, but just for people to know, I'm doing a PhD program right now, and this is what my dissertation research is on, is looking at a lot of these questions of what footwear is, what does it do to the human body, how does the human body react, does it even react to it? These are the big questions we're trying to ask. The problem is you can't answer those big questions until you really take care of the small components, and those are the harder questions to ask. And so this is why I've been so excited to talk to Sam as well, because your experience, your knowledge. Before we got on, Sam was being very humble and saying, I haven't developed, I haven't designed any footwear. But again, it's your insight and your knowledge behind this and your background into this that is really helpful. So I think my big question for you first is, what do you think about the current trends in cushioning and geometry that are happening in the footwear world? It's a very broad question.
Yes, cushioning and geometry. Well, the Vaporfly with the Zoom X really kind of changed the game. People could go back and say there were, other than EVA, there was polyurethane, this, that, and the other thing. But what that Zoom X did was provide a tremendous amount of cushioning at a very light weight and a very exciting ride. So there have been many others who are addressing the same, if you will, the same challenge, which is to reduce weight and also provide, I think, running should be pleasurable, right? You shouldn't feel like you're wearing although some people may get comfort from a stiff brick on their foot, and you guys as professionals may know there are some that need all kinds of support and stability. I've always kind of questioned how much and what that can cause poorly prescribed in the running store, i.e. pronation, right? And yes. I'd maybe even ask you the question, how many people really, really need tons of posted, which means a firmer inner side to prevent something? I don't know what, but you tell me.
Right. So, Sam, to answer that question, that's actually been very well answered in the research world, in the clinical world. Unfortunately, it does not seem to have made it to the public, where the concepts of the medial post was introduced in the 70s with the thought of going, pronation is the devil, we need to stop that. And it's taken long enough for us to try to convince the industry to go, pronation is a natural motion. It's a natural biomechanical motion, a way to shock absorb. The problem isn't the motion. It's like any other body part. Can you control it? And if sometimes you have to recognize that pronation, and we haven't defined what an excessive amount is. There's no number that says once you go past this degree, that's overpronation. We have not defined that, and it's not been defined by the literature to this day. So to answer your question, there is a lot of people who are putting quote-unquote support shoes. That's not necessary. And we see them all the time going, I still have knee pain, and going, get out of this shoe. What you're having at your foot and ankle, that's a compensation. You've now taken away your compensatory pattern, and now you have knee pain, right? Because you didn't address the truth what's going on. So very few, there are people that do that do benefit from medial posting. I don't want to say it's bad. It's just that would it be their knee geometry, bow leg versus knock knee? Do we know? There's it's highly individual. It's very, very hard to make overarching claims. And this is what we've run into the research in, is because when you try to look at big studies that try to make conclusive claims, there's nothing to be said because people are so different. You can't stick them in big boxes. You have to look at the individual and go, why are you having this issue? And I may have had some experience that might help me, but because people are so unique. And so that's why it makes this really challenging, and why the whole going, hey, let's use one method for everybody, that does not work. And so
now correct me. And I think Derek Lee, a wonderful reviewer in Singapore,
Yeah.
agrees with me that the best of the super shoes so far, for both of us, we agree, and I hope I'm getting this right, is the very original Vaporfly, the baby blue, I call it.
Mm.
It had a sloppy, some people thought, upper, right? It caused, I think, and you'll correct me as to the exact forward of the midfoot pronation that drove you down onto the plate and to toe off. Very distinct.
Yep.
No other Vaporfly came close. The ones later, they firmed up the foam. They put the stupid fly net on it. It was a very, so that it had a pronation action. The Adios Pro that we're still trying to figure out what happened. I noticed that the toe bumper on the medial side is softer than the lateral side. I think maybe some of the same, right, to drive you to toe off. So pronation is an interesting animal.
It's an important animal.
Certainly.
What they're trying to do to facilitate some of the natural, what's the word I'm looking for? Some of the naturally efficient components of the human extremity is if they can get you to get off that first toe, right? You will activate the windlass mechanism, which helps stiffen up the arch, helps make the ankle more efficient, will help you drive off and toe off better with more force. There's plenty of research on how important that is. So it's funny that, again, the shoe might be trying to facilitate pronation. And remember, this is a relative term because it's trying to facilitate it at the forefoot of the shoe. And it's a good thing. And my favorite Vaporfly to this day is still the original, is still the OG.
The blue.
I hated
the baby blue, right?
Baby blue. I have a pair that I was
You too.
Yes. A friend of mine gave me a used pair, and I still love them. I did not like the Flyknit. I found it very uncomfortable and stable. Hence why I gave it to David.
I like Flyknit.
I gave it to him. The Next Percent was good and more stable, but didn't have the same magic. And I don't have enough miles on the Alpha Fly to make a conclusive decision on that. David does, but I totally agree. And I think that when we can get away from telling people that pronation is bad and start going, how can we facilitate some of the natural motions of the foot, which pronation is one of them, right? And we don't. We have to start moving people away from that. And unfortunately, there are still many components in the industry and many people in running stores and people online who are continually using that verbiage. And people like yourself, Derek, obviously knows this stuff really well. Like we know this stuff. And so it's a challenge to try to get the public to go, you have to change your mindset on this. And
there's also I believe also a shoe wall thing. Even though so much has gone more online, there's a line of quote neutral, there's a line of stability, and here's what we're doing here, here's what so that it's presence at retail, maybe that's sort of a tail that continues on. The newer age pronation control, the rail based stuff, including the Nike Infinity and the Brooks. Can't stand them. Particularly when they put them on the lateral side, it just spoiled that shoe. The best one, and I don't know if you guys have tried it, I think the Ultra Provision, the new Provision with the soft foam rails and the bands that wrap. I don't know what it does in terms of controlling heavy duty pronation, but it sure seems to work. It's a nice shoe.
The provision and the paradigm from Ultra has been very interesting in developing non-traditional methods of guidance. I'm not going to say support, but facilitating Ben O'Nigg's concept of the preferred motion path. I think they're doing very well on. Sal, obviously, I'm super biased when I say this because I know Simon Bartold, but I think Salman has also done a decent job with some of that stuff. But also provision and the paradigm were the two kind of the first ones where I was like, this is interesting. So I totally
Yeah.
agree with you on that. I have
Well,
tried the new provision briefly, but not fully.
yeah. No, we're going to talk about outsoles, but since we're talking about pronation,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, and tell me if you can see this, okay? This is the New Balance
Yeah.
More Trail, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what I want to call you guys' attention to is right in here, the outsole. Wait a minute. We're right here. See how it wraps up around? Can you see
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That outsoles can often provide a key element of stability. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
overdone, in a shoe that's designed, so you often have plates, through here, but look how that wraps up. Okay. That's Fresh Foam X. It's a softer midsole. It provides a tremendous amount of rear stability to the shoe, just the outsole, along with, of course, these sidewalls. So it's interesting. We'll talk about outsoles later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, like this is the whole art and science of the footwear industry and running as a whole, is the idea of playing around with a lot of these compounds and really creating a unique ride out of these shoes. And just to kind of second off of Matt earlier, anytime they do attach a number or some kind of theory or applied research and science, it's almost always in static measurements. And that's the only thing they can accurately, definitively do every time. But when you go and no one moves statically. When you move, it's dynamic. And so that's the hardest part about all of this, is that's where the unique biomechanics and components of every runner comes to life. And so that's why like one quote unquote super shoe might work so much better for someone else than another person. And someone else might entirely ditch the super shoe idea, and they might benefit from a more traditional shoe in the racing world. So it's weird, because it's like all the numbers, all the objective data, all of the things that you're taught in school tend to all be static measurements and things that they can easily replicate. But the truth is, dynamically, it's very hard to get, objective data on that. So that's also why I love the running shoe industry as a whole, because so much of it is creativity and art based. They try to incorporate as much science as they can into it, but they're playing around with outsoles, they're playing with midsoles, they're playing dual foam compounds, their uppers, and how the upper can even play on the actual shoe and how it pulls in different ways. So it's super, super interesting. And that's a side note. So sorry.
It's cool.
Okay, and then the other component is that we have all this science trying to tell us. I just spent the last 3 days in a biomechanics lab, which is what I'll be doing the rest of the semester. And just because you get something on a certain measurement may have nothing to do with how that person feels and what their perception of the shoe is. So that's a whole other thing.
One thing I might suggest for research is is kind of polling or talking to people more subjectively, and then seeing what they're experiencing, for good or bad, is coming from, right?
Yeah.
And then try to measure. But don't start with measurement. Start with the forest first, right? The forest, and then try to get at what they're experiencing. Particularly if you get some, I won't say unanimity. There won't be, but you get a trend. A trend in what people are saying about something. That's just a suggestion.
along those lines, and this actually I think will go into something we want to get your thoughts on too, Sam. But I believe it was Saucony. At least we were talking to Chad from Saucony a little bit, and he was saying that they were testing and asking people how firm or soft a shoe felt, and the amount of wherever they put that on the spectrum had nothing to do with the actual durometer of the shoe. So they started to ask people, and people who would say a lower durometer shoe was more firm to them feeling wise than like the higher durometer, and it just wasn't what they expected. And so
but that's an incomplete picture, because, for example, the outsole plays a key role in that. The rest of the geometry, we're going to finish up our review of the Razor Plus now. I'm not going to be participating in that one. I got enough shoes, but I've always felt that one lacks sufficient outsole heel rubber to deal with the geometry and the softness of the foam. Contrast that with the RC Elite from New Balance, right?
Yeah.
Look at that rubber. Or even the A6 Meta Racer, the heel rubber, right? And that's a fairly soft midsole. So it's a, there's the durometer is, as far as I'm concerned, is only part of the picture.
Yeah, I think that's my exact point. Is they're asking a question that's not matching up with the statistic they're looking for.
Right.
Where asking the question that should be step one, and then look at everything combined to find out what's the matching with the subjective report. Kind of what you were saying. I think the research is starting to notice, hey, we're missing something because the experience is different than what we're considering important. I'm putting air quotes for those who are just listening on podcasts, important at this point to measure. So I guess my question for you in this was, what impact do you feel like the soft or firmness of a cushion has to do with a ride of the shoe if you only change that? Also, we can maybe talk about outsole, because I think Matt, we did our review of the Razor Plus, and that was a piece of Matt's experience in terms of how firm the Razor Plus felt. So maybe we can.
Okay. Hey, Matt, did you feel it was firm?
I felt that the addition of the Goodyear outsole helped firm up and stabilize the ride a little bit compared to the previous version. That was a perception. I think that, so David, you had the same thing. I talked to somebody else who actually had a very different response. So it's, again, interesting, the individual responses to these things.
Yes. Yeah, because the durometer, the firmness of the foam, but there's also its characteristics, and it's so hard to describe, I would describe Hyperburst as I can sort of feel all those tiny bubbles, right? They're taut, they have some rebound to them, but you can feel that there's a density of bubbles that, in the Hyperburst. I always describe the Zoom X as kind of a silky feel, very silky, smooth feel. The Power Run PB, the pellets of P-backs, kind of a firmer overall ride, denser, much denser than the Zoom X, but still very well cushioned. The geometry of the plates plays a role there. This new in the RC Elite, the fuel cell autoclave, I don't know what that is, but making it so light, that's feels comparable in some ways to the Zoom X, but a little firmer. So there's so many, and then you got the Meta Racer with the flight foam, kind of bouncy, really feels like a bouncy ball. So some are firmer, regular Power Run in Saucony. I tend to really like that feel. I love the Ride 13, but the Ride 13, we also should talk about flexibility versus rocker-based shoes. For me, with the Ride 13,
I have it right
the key to that shoe, for me, is the 4-foot rubber in combination with the flexibility. Yes, thick, David. I mean, there's a lot of thick rubber there, deep grooves. That is the secret of that shoe. That's what makes it. If they had less rubber, it would probably feel mushy, not as responsive, given and the flexibility. So many factors.
Did you test Triumph 17 and 18?
Yes.
What did you think in terms of rubber outsole impact on that shoe?
Not that one. The impact there for me, trying to remember, the impact there for me was.
You've only tested 100 shoes this year.
No, but what I really felt about the 18 was what they did is they moved the 18 away from the Ride 13. If they had just done the 17 the way they did if they'd done the 18 the way they did the 17, you'd be fairly close, even though it's a different foam. What I liked about the 18 was it became much more of a super cushion kind of recovery shoe. And what I noticed most, there's a bit more stack, I think, but what I noticed most was what they made the profile on the ground of the midsole, outsole flatter, even though it rolls along nicely. So it's just a very highly cushioned, stable, somewhat heavier shoe. It's very pleasurable to run in if you just want to move along slow. You know, it's not a daily trainer anymore, but it's their super cushioned trainer, deluxe trainer. I also like the Omni. Is it 9 or 19? I forget which number, but the latest Omni, very similar actually to the Triumph 18, but with really some the quote pronation control, very hardly noticed at all.
That's awesome.
That's another one I like to kind of do easy miles in. I tend to like a stable shoe for easy miles.
Yeah.
I don't want to pay attention to my form. You know, I just mosey along.
So I'm gonna ask a follow-up question to our talk on geometry and cushioning. So what, with your years of experience, what do you think? You can choose which, you can do both or choose one. What do you think the consumer or the industry is missing at the moment when it comes to footwear? Is there something really big that stands out to you? Either one of those groups or both are missing when it comes to what's either development or what to be aware of?
Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the buckets that people are in. Maybe at retail, the bucket of pronation, you know, or neutral. I enjoy some shoes that have a bit more support for certain kinds of runs. There are people who will only run in X kind of shoe. So the industry needs, and I know they're various, you know, people have done various things, you know, measuring, Brooks did it, and, you know, Nike did a study on the knees and, you know, all this stuff. And I've got to say that even though I broke my leg when I was a kid, I have a bit of a twisted foot, I've never had any knee issues whatsoever, or any issues beyond the few little injuries you may want to talk about, and still was able to run pretty fast when I was young. So I think the pigeonholing is a big issue, pigeonholing in mentality. And we see that, you know, you guys are on the Running Shoe Geeks, you know, people say, I'm only running in this, and they're also often only running in a certain brand forever, you know. Version, we won't say 15, 18, 22, 23. And then what happens is maybe it changes kind of significantly and they're lost. I mean, they don't know what to do, or they're mad when there are other options that might be very satisfying for them. In terms of the actual technologies, materials, I think that that lighter isn't always the best thing. I think often sort of the enthusiasts want lighter, and some of them may show up at your guys' practices as a result. I think there's an overemphasis on the lightest possible weight in a certain part of the population, let's say. However, well done. There's nothing more pleasurable than a super lightweight shoe that works well. I mean, for real. I mean, it's amazing. The endorphin speed might be a good example. That Saucony, New Balance RC Elite. In the trail world right now, I'm just over the moon with this Innovate G270. I think I forget what it is, 9 ounces, an amazing shoe. Zero drop. That's another thing, drop, right? A zero drop, or even 4 millimeter drop, and I'm maybe looking at some shoes we just talked about, can feel or Newton, you can feel way lower than 4 millimeters.
Yep.
And a zero drop can feel like way more than zero. So that's another, well, I guess you call it a bucket people put themselves in, you know, of drop, which I think at either extreme of very high drop, low drop, if that's all you're running, I think they'll be visiting you guys.
Yep.
Eventually,
Yeah.
if you keep, you know, stuck, and the same with the pronation versus neutral, heavy versus light, I think you need to mix it up. Now that, you know, they'll sell a lot more shoes too, but I think people say
we do. And so
happier that way.
this is something that we do talk to our patients about. And I certainly talk to mine about is don't get stuck in one shoe, because what little evidence we have on things that prevent running injuries, one of the things that we can't, outside of strength training, if you can have a little variety of footwear, that is helpful, right? Because the more I want to talk about, if you are in the same thing and do the same thing over and over and over again, that is no different than overtraining, right? You have a little bit of variation that'll expose your body to a couple different forces. And that's why, again, we're not trying to sell shoes, right? But it is nice to have a little variety. And so just from an injury prevention standpoint. So it's the same thing for the people that come still to this day going, I need to have a zero drop barefoot minimalist shoe. And I'm not judging. I was one of those people at one point. Have a little variety to give your body a little break. Nathan, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And I was gonna say a little sneak peek. We're doing a little case study with Sam for another episode of this, so we'll dive more into kind of injury stuff then. So I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole right now. But just to summarize, kind of what we all just hit with shoe topics and what Sam brought to the table, the impact of the outsole is more than just grip and more than just durability. It can affect the ride. It can affect stability. It can affect how firm or soft or flexible a shoe feels, and just how thick that rubber is makes a big difference. I liked your example of the More X trail shoe that you brought up. I think the first shoe that I experienced that with was actually, in a minor way, was the Endorphin Shift. There's a very small amount of the outsole, and I noticed that in a big way when I put that one on, and it was one of the things that I actually loved about that shoe.
Very subtle. It works really well. It works way better than similar kind of rubber in, for example, the Guide 13, where you really notice the plate there, the side plate, you know. So instead of a side plate, it's an outsole piece. Can I do one more outsole thing?
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Side note.
Okay.
I found the Shift to be way more stable for me than the Guide.
I would agree.
And the same thing, it was exactly the same. I found the Hurricane to actually be unstable just because of the geometry design, because of that. But that's just me. Anyway, don't.
But you know the Hurricane. You know, those are, well, the Guide 13 with the side plate, that's been done before, right? I find it kind of awkward. I haven't never run the Hurricane. Omni was good. I like the Omni, but some of the Hurricane's isn't that kind of an old school design, really?
They changed some stuff a little bit, so the design is actually quite similar to how they did the Guide. I think the way they did it, there's some potential with the next version that's coming out from some of the initial designs I've seen, but I just found it unstable.
I liked also in the Shift the extended external heel cup thing. You doctors, tell me what you think that does for people, because I don't think anybody needs any more support for anything than what's in that shoe, and us neutral guys love it too.
Yeah, I would totally agree that I think a lot of times for stability is overdone for a lot of people, and unfortunately people there's different things that should work for different people, but I think stability tends to be overdone a little bit, and I think that was a really cool way of providing a little bit of, again, not stability, a little bit of gentle guidance that we probably would not pick up if you hook somebody up to a Qualisys, a 3D motion analysis. You probably wouldn't pick up any differences, but from a perception standpoint, it is quite pleasant. So I think that kind of subtle, let's support your natural biomechanics and figure out if there's anything else in terms of a strengthening you might need. I think that was really great that they did.
I think,
and it's also kind of a rocker design too.
Yes.
You know, it's a.
the heel cup on the shift, the way that I've been thinking about it, actually comes from like a surgical world. So in surgery, if people have like, let's say they have a fibular fracture,
right,
they'll likely get something called like an ORIF. And if they put in a plate on the side of a bone, they call it load sharing. Whereas if they put in these old kind of school models, it would be load shielding. And so it's better for something to be load sharing for a bone because that can help it heal. Anyway, that's not necessarily the point. Cool. But I think the way that I think about that cup coming down is kind of a load sharing mechanism for the foam. So it extends from the upper down into the midsole. And so the foam and that rigid heel counter are sharing the load of the impact instead of just the foam taking all of the blunt of it. It's being shared by that more rigid kind of connected piece, just like in surgery when they put in like an ORIF for somebody with an ankle, like a pretty severe ankle fracture that's displaced. It shares the load with the bone but doesn't shield it from it. And so it can allow the bone to act in the way it's supposed to and heal the way it's supposed to, all that, but it doesn't take away from the integrity of it, if that makes sense.
What I noticed is how much further back it is, right?
Yeah.
In other words, instead of being towards the midfoot, it's way back at the heel.
Right.
I don't know biomechanically if it quote controls pronation or not, but it's not felt really as anything obnoxious, and it kind of guides your foot. I think it's a brilliant design.
I love that shoe.
Speaking of which, I think we need to abandon the concept of motion control shoes, because just from having worked in running stores and then now seeing this from a mechanic standpoint and like actually measuring the motion, you can put somebody in a Brooks Beast and they may still pronate the exact same amount. You are not controlling.
Really?
You may. And when I worked in running stores, I used to see this all the time and I was like, that's weird. And then getting into PT school and going afterward and starting to study the research, going, it doesn't necessarily change the motion.
So that must really put a lot of stress higher up the chain then, if they're still pronate, because underneath it's probably like a brick.
Yes.
Maybe that's what screws up their knees.
Yeah, so that it's not uncommon that if you give somebody a stability shoe and they don't need it, you may start seeing pains elsewhere, knee, hip, other areas. So you really, if you're going to give somebody a moderate or high stability shoe that they really feel, you better have a good reason for doing that. If not, they're probably.
Can you guys hear me? I just lost my. Okay.
Yeah.
My things went dead. Can I before I want an outsole thing if you guys don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know, but so I'm going to try to describe it. It's the RC Elite from New Balance, and what it has is a whole bunch of little nubs injected into a plate instead of kind of conventional rubber. Now, this it's very similar to the Reebok Fast Pro, which even old me run a hilly 5-mile race and be perfectly happy in. What I think the magic of this outsole, in addition to reducing weight, is it provides a platform that the toe off can be as anywhere the person wants, and it also provides cushioning to the shoe. And there's more. I found more forefoot cushioning in the RC than the TC, and our other reviewers felt the same. Whereas the TC has just a slab of rubber, continuous slab of rubber. So a very neat concept of cushioning, and also kind of an infinite way for the foot to interact with the shoe. Very neat.
Yeah.
Sam, you're making me want to get that shoe, even though I promised myself I wasn't going to buy any more carbon fiber plated shoes after the last fiasco that some people on Running Shoe Geeks might be aware of. I'm still upset about that, but you're making me want to buy that.
Well, it's a more conventional riding shoe. It feels, it doesn't feel super exotic, super, like the Alpha Fly or the Adios Pro, it's kind of, it's basically you take the TC and you whack 2 ounces off it. There.
That's
What's wrong with that? And it's only $25 more,
Sure. It's a pretty good deal.
Anyway.
all right.
Okay.
So we are going to transition into our final question for this episode here. And we know you've tested a ton of shoes this year, but we want to talk, each of us kind of given that we're getting closer to the end of 2020, what a year it's been. There's been a lot of fun shoes that have been dropped this year by a lot of different companies. But if you look in the world of workhorse trainers or kind of shoes you go to, what would be one of your top and your favorite pick for the year? And we can all answer it.
Okay. There are 3 that come to mind. Okay, 3 to come to mind. I'm going to list them off, and I'm going to tell you which one I think is my favorite. We just mentioned the Fuel Cell TC. Love that kind of bouncy heel. It's just a deluxe kind of fast ride. Not the lightest shoe, but very reasonable. I also like the Ride 13. Mainly because I do like a flexible shoe, but I like some pop out of it. It's that outsole. The one, and I got to say I haven't run it as much as I would like to, but if I don't have something to run, I'll reach for it, and I reached for it 2 or 3 times in the last month. I think as a kind of workhorse, the Pegasus 37 women's is one of the smoothest, kind of most versatile, it'll do some little light trails as well, shoes out there, and a total, nothing wrong with the men's, awkward though, awkward. It's a smooth shoe, and I'll get political here a bit in a minute, but they softened the foam, the React foam compared to the men's, and they dropped the PSI of the airbag. They lightened the upper. Okay, the upper is lighter mesh, fits a little more generously, and the shoe is lighter. Now you got to be so I have a women's D, so you got to have small enough feet that whatever they end up with a D, but it's just a very smooth. And I've run a lot of Pegasus, haven't enjoyed many of them in recent years, really haven't. This is a super nice smooth shoe. Will people get, well, I can't run in a women's shoe, blah, 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 blah. Believe me, it's a D, it fits better than the men's, it isn't suffocating, it's a softer, slightly softer, the airbag is not kind of something pushing up against your foot. An excellent workhorse trainer.
Wow. I didn't realize there were that many differences between the two, between the men's and women's. That's amazing.
The Pegasus 37, they did that specifically because they really wanted it, because the women were giving different feedback than the men, and so they really tried to change that.
I would love to be a fly on the wall as to who they designed the men's for. Who was the inspiration, or what was the inspiration? Especially the pressure in the airbag. Was it the same pressure with a different foam that they put in the Alpha Fly, which works brilliantly? And they said, oh, just, it's got to, who knows? But some people love it, but it's kind of an awkward shoe compared. The women's is my pick.
Oh, great.
Very
One
cool.
other thing, I might send us on a little rabbit hole really quick, Sam, but I want to hear your thoughts. You talked a little bit about kind of like fit and toe box.
Yeah.
What do you see kind of in the shoe design and kind of people's experience with those? What are your thoughts on fit and toe box?
So three elements: the actual width, right? The materials, and the toe bumper. And there may be also effect of the geometry, be if it's a flexible shoe versus. I think the key the two key components are not so much the actual width, unless you really need, and you guys might have the statistics, who really needs a wide, but it's the materials in the toe bumper. And how and overlays, right? So, for example, the Ride 13 fits me very well. I'm very happy, but the mesh is quite dense, quite thick, and the toe bumper, if I remember, is quite dense and thick as well. So it's kind of a snug fit in a normal size. That Pegasus women's, big difference from the men's. Lighter materials, essentially. That's the difference there. An interesting one, again, this is the more trail. I have one hike and one run in them. This is a trail shoe. I don't know if you can see, but very soft, even soft and kind of supple for a road shoe mesh with kind of a ballistic nylon toe bumper that's not overly firm. Very, very comfortable, but maybe not a good shoe for technical trail running because this is just too supple, you see? So that's a whole blend, you know, of elements of how the width is influenced, the feeling of fit is influenced by the design of toe bumper, actual width, and materials. But there's a fourth element, and it's kind of sad because, you know, as I'm fortunate enough to test so many shoes, I see this not always, but and I can't remember right now which more than others. But when somebody tries on a shoe in a store, you know, the insole or the sock liner is puffed up, right? It gets packed down. The first run, the mesh will stretch some when you run in them. And people, I think, often leave because, you know, once they run it out the door, you know, it's hard to return, you know. So it's a very tricky problem. And I think people often, because they don't want to own a shoe that they think won't fit them, they return them without having run them to see really what that toe box really will end up. Most toe boxes, and I have a kind of a medium to narrow foot, end up really quite fine. There shouldn't be as much agony. If I remember back to to the early days, you know, the 70s, 80s, you know, we went out for a run, a hard run, you know, our toes were bleeding. Never mind every race, okay? It's just immeasurably better. So, you know,
Quit your belly aching, basically, right?
well, no, because I don't know what people's shape of their foot really is, but I also feel kind of their agony in trying to decide, you know, if it works or not. Half size, this, that, oof. But I will say the Flyknit, Nike Flyknit, Epic React, the Vaporfly, I couldn't stand that stuff. Pressed down on my big toe. I really didn't like that at all. Some of those early knits. Another one that's troublesome for me with my big toe is the Levitate 4, because in general knit shoes are often compressive over the toes, and the Levitate 4, for some reason, they put a strip of denser stuff right up the middle. Looks good. Even the 1080, you know. But I will say the new, here it is. The Dynablast.
Oh, yeah.
The knit upper, right? Incredibly comfortable. Too comfortable. It's the first knit upper where, you know, they couldn't see the toe bumper. I don't know if you can see it, but not enough toe bumper. But just an unbelievably comfortable knit upper. So that's an evolution of knit, I think. Maybe goes, you know, this is just a bit more lockdown, but in general, I can't. I have a hard time with mid uppers. But
So Sam, just to follow up on what you're saying is, I think people need to recognize that fit, and especially in the forefoot, is highly individual. But there's also a lot of components that go into that. And there are no statistics, by the way, on what qualifies somebody to wear a certain width, right? It's just how it feels in your foot. Does it break in? And you're not going to know that immediately. There's a lot of things and there's some companies who are really smart that work really hard on trying to make those insoles really comfortable, because that's what gets people out the door. It's not necessarily what keeps them in the shoe, but that you have to kind of get that shoe worn in a little bit to really understand what the characteristics are going to be like. And certain people, I think one of the biggest factors, not to make a blanket statement, is going to be your body awareness, your proprioception, and the sensitivity of your feet. Certain people have much more sensitive feet than others. I have people that probably have like a 4E width foot that come in wearing a narrow shoe, and I'm like, is that comfortable? Like, yeah, this is the most comfortable shoe I have. And their foot is hanging off the sole. And I'm like, but that's just perception, right? So just to follow up on that, a comment on the toe box stuff is that there's a lot of different things that affect fit. And you're going to have to recognize that even the size of the actual width there's so many other factors that are going to affect how it feels. So don't just get stuck on how small or how big the toe box is. Your own foot sensitivity is going to also tell you that, right? Certain people have more sensitive appendages than others, right? So it just depends, and don't ignore a shoe just because it looks narrow, right? Like that was my experience with the Razor Plus, and then I put it on, I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel as narrow as I was expecting, and it stretched out really nicely. So it's highly dependable. There's a lot of components, so don't just get stuck on, is this anatomical or not? Is this perfectly wide or is it perfectly narrow? Give it some time.
Oh. And David, Matt, what about you guys for your kind of workhorse shoe this year?
Well, I'll just say beautifully said, Matt, there. For the fit, I had the random tiny comment, I swear, but I had the same exact experience in the Razor Plus and in the Reebok Panthea. Like the upper wasn't, when you put it on, it felt different. It expanded a little bit and ended up being really nice, and it wasn't overly narrow. But for a workhorse trainer, I have two that come to mind. So I've got one that I kind of always go to, and then I have another one that I think I go to more when I know I'm gonna be more on road. And my main one would be the Mizuno Wave Rider 24 Wave Knit. So actually going off of the upper and fit, this isn't a review, but the upper does have a big influence on the midsole and the ride of the shoe. It's a softer heel. They have the NRZ wedge. The transition is filled in with the NRZ where it used to be an exposed plate, so that midfoot transition is real smooth. And the upper pulls up on the front, and you get this nice little toe spring. And so it's just very fluid for me, and I really, really like it. And the traction is just enough to kind of go into some dirt or trail situations if I have to. So I really, really like that shoe for my workhorse. It's crazy durable. It's carbon rubber outsole, and midsole's holding up just fine. My other one's the Reebok Symmetros. Softer platform. I love it for the road, just very flowy. The bevel feels nice, and also that thing is going to go until the cows come home. So I don't have it in hand, but
I'll go next because two came to my mind, and it was the Wave Rider 24 and the Reebok Symmetros. So, except for me, the winner for me is the Symmetros this year. That was the shoe. I mean, I love the Forever Float Ride Energy. Just a really enjoyable shoe to run in. And what this shoe did for me, I know Sam, we kind of went back and forth a little bit talking about experience of the sock liner in this one. But for me, they took everything I liked about the Forever Float Ride Energy and just added a little more with a little bit more stack, and then changing the heel bevel in the geometry of this shoe. So it smoothed it out a lot for me. The durability is a lot better from a foam changing standpoint in terms of getting a lot of miles on them. And I have more on this than I do my original pair of Forever Float Ride Energy shoes. And so this was my winner for the year.
I'm going to go with Sam and go with 3 since I'm having trouble making up my mind. So same as the other
one. I picked one.
Okay. Sam picked the peg, women's peg.
That's fair. All right. So my the Wave Rider 24 knit, again with those guys, is one of my favorites of the year. Mizuno has done such a good job with how they change the midsole geometry, how they set up the way it fits. It's a trainer. I have probably done some of my fastest workouts in that shoe, which is not to be expected. Like I'm like Sam. I love uphill workouts. My fiance hates me when I do this to her, but we have done several uphill tempos, which is my favorite thing in the world. They hurt so good. And that has been a great shoe for that. The higher drop is good. I don't notice as much as I would have thought. The way it rolls is nice, and that the energy is great. And I'm really excited for some of their other stuff coming out. But I also got to give a shout out to the Reebok Symmetros and the Endorphin Shift as well as the kind of top ones. But the Rider 24 knit has been my top one of the year so far.
Gee whiz, I really struggled with the Symmetros toe box.
Just two you said that.
And one of the rare times that I fiddled with sock liners to try to firm up the front a little bit, put a little more volume in it. The rear of the shoe, fantastic. The bevel, I love that. You guys would know what it does, but I thought really, really fine. But then the front, not enough toe bumper is what I would say. But
there's like no bumper. No bumper.
And pretty wide, super comfortable, but for me, something a little off. But a great ride, but just, anyway.
Yeah. Shout out to Reebok, by the way. They did a great job with that bevel. That was awesome. I really applaud them. And they worked really hard on that, so good on them.
Good stuff. Good
Fabulous.
stuff.
Well, this is part one here with Sam. We really appreciate all of your insight into the running shoe and just spending time with us. It's kind of like having a celebrity on in the running shoe world. So we're thankful to have you join us.
The pleasure's all mine. You guys are great. Love your reviews and your running, and it's really been super fun. Let's do it again, and let's try to share with all those millions of people out there trying to figure out how to enjoy their running. The shoes play a role the best we can for racing, trails, all of it. So this is great. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
We'll definitely do this again.